Hey, when's the new Story Seasons video coming out?
Oh, shoot. Alright, so Story Seasons Pioneers of Alltown came out recently, and I've been excited for this game ever since watching the initial gameplay trailer last October.
To clear space for your field.
Oh, dude, that's what the tree do in Stardew! Are those sprinklers? Just like in Stardew Valley! Oh my god, is that a customizable overworld? Just like in Stardew? For, obvious reasons. That being, I always wanted Marvelous to look at Stardew's success. Think about how Concerned Ape effectively out-Harvest Moon, and see what Marvelous would have come up with to compete against it. Also, before I continue, a big thank you to all of you who requested this review. This video wouldn't have been possible if there wasn't so much support on the last video. And if you want to support the channel further, please consider subscribing because less than 7% of you guys are currently subscribed. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job, and it's free. So, after playing for 70 hours, how good is Story Seasons Pioneers of Alltown? It's pretty good. Right off the bat, the character customization is really good in comparison to other titles, and the graphics and character models overall look like the best I've ever seen in a farming sim. It's a huge step up from their previous games, and I hope Marvelous continues this level of quality. I also think the characters themselves are well designed, and to accompany them, there's over 200 events, or so I've read. You can also marry people of the opposite gender, which is a pretty big deal for a lot of people, but honestly, it's literally...
Insert current year here.
I think we can just unanimously agree to make this a default feature in every single farming sim game after this one. Hey, take notes. Mining and fishing are now a little bit more intricate and are actually a decent challenge now. There's also a skill system to level those skills, which I found to be a nice way to passively reward the player. And overall, I liked how they handled the progression in this game because every upgrade felt impactful and empowering, while for the most part, letting me go at my own pace. I say for the most part with asterisks because while progression feels meaningful once you achieve it, the journey there just isn't satisfying for two main reasons. Reason one being the pacing, which is actually pretty good because it doesn't time gate me from doing what I want to do. But it's such a tease because that's true for only like the first 2 of the 3 area upgrades. After that, the whole game turns into a massive grind because of the astronomically large amounts of resources to get the final building upgrades. There's just this massive spike in required resources that I suspect is just to pad out game time.
Oh, but VT is supposed to be grinding and get progressively harder. That's how farming sim games work.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Except for the fact you need a huge amount of a certain resource whose limiting factor to obtain is time. Literally, this wood is needed for all late game tool and building upgrades and is only found in this small portion of the 3rd area. I get like what, 2 trees every 3 to 4 days? Oh, and that's not even the worst part though. The second reason chasing after these upgrades gives me a literal aneurysm is that getting the resources just isn't enough. No, that'd be too easy. You have to go through this convoluted process of processing the materials through these makers, and let me just tell you, these makers are the bane of my existence.
But VT, you also process raw materials in Stardew Valley. How is that any different from this? Aren't you just biased towards Stardew?
Yes, I am. But hear me out here. In Stardew, progress isn't usually limited by the processing of materials. Sure, there's the occasional time where you might need to use a maker to complete one of the bundles, and the use of makers in Stardew does make things more efficient or profitable. But for the most part, progression in Stardew doesn't require you to use makers. The game is designed in such a way where items are obtainable in a different number of ways. I doubt you even need to craft items either. Yet, in Story Seasons Pioneers of Alltown, almost all of the progression requires at least some sort of processed material, if not an egregious amount of money for that stage in the game. And not only progression, but also a large majority of craftable items requires some sort of refinement. Ironically, the few items that don't are the first makers you craft. The over-reliance on these makers and the fact that you can only load them one at a time, I constantly find myself spending more time managing these makers more than doing any other activity. Are you seeing this? It's a complete eyesore. You might think this is excessive, but this is how you play the game. Literally at any time, my inventory is filled with raw materials and their processed counterparts to reduce the amount of times I need to go through my chests.
But VT...
Shut up, it's not the same as Stardew. In Stardew, I can go and have it be at least sort of mentally stimulating. In Story Seasons Pioneers of Alltown, you gotta go through this damn menu every single time you interact with the machine. It slows the whole process down to a crawl and makes me dread every single run I do to refill them. So let's recap. On top of having these late game upgrades take a metric butt ton of resources to complete, one of their core components is time gated by how limited and slow they respawn. And in addition, having to go through these hundreds of clunky menu interactions just to process them, it's pretty easy to see why I find this to be one of the worst parts of the game. Alright, forget whoever this guy is who is in charge of quality assurance. He obviously doesn't know what quality is. Here's how you fix the problem. Step 1. Hire me. Step 2. Make the makers automatically take the resource of the highest tier without having me go through that goddamn menu. In farming sim games, you gotta do the same task over and over and over again. And you have to streamline these tasks as much as possible because the slightest inconvenience is magnified by 100 times due to the repetitive nature of these games. Step 3. Either reduce the amount of materials used by stuff in half and balance it out by having resources drop 50% less, or Make it so you can load more stuff into the makers at a time. The less time overall spent at the makers, the better, because this is a farming sim game, not a factory sim. And while we're at it, why don't we just cut the size of them in half as well, because they take up so much goddamn space on my farm. Step 4. If it were up to me, which it isn't because they didn't follow up on step 1, I'd make it so that maybe wood doesn't have like 5 different tiers because that's a little like insane. Especially considering it's just overkill that contributes to the already horrible item bloat this game has. Like, do we really need over 15 different types of makers? Do we really need 2 items for coal? Why not just skip the middleman and just let me use the goddamn coal? Twine is literally just used for 3 recipes, why don't you just let it take grass instead? Man, do we even need 5 different types of grass as well? Why not just have 1 resource type for wood and grass respectively, and just have more difficult to craft items just take more of them, but in exchange have higher tier trees and grass tufts drop them more often as well? I mean, there's a reason why Stardew was designed in this way instead of whatever roundabout system this is. Were they just too afraid they'd be a little bit too much like Stardew? It's too late for that. And honestly, copying game mechanics and systems from other games isn't inherently bad in my opinion, if that makes the gameplay objectively better than whatever the alternative is. Even better if you can put your own spin on the formula and hopefully make it more unique. That being said, while Stories uses Pioneers of Alltown attempts to implement features from Stardew, I've noticed some similarities with Animal Crossing as well, more specifically the online features.
Wow, does this mean I can visit and help farm on my friend's world?
Kind of. You can visit them.
Oh!
As an NPC.
Oh.
Yeah, the online is pretty limited. It makes you wonder why they even bother adding it. I'm sure they actually wanted to add it sometime during development, but I guess it got scrapped because the game was already rushed as it is. But hey, don't be sad. On the bright side, you can share the photos you take and have them appear on other people's loading screens. Oh, look at that boy! Man, what is wrong with you people? No, seriously, what is wrong with you people? I am disgusted by the pure degeneracy I am currently witnessing right now. There's also a museum, but honestly, I don't care for it because of how lackluster it is in comparison to Animal Crossings. It's not grand. It don't got style. It doesn't inspire me to go out and fish or find artifacts. It's just a place for me to put these useless rocks. I could just do that in my house. Speaking of which, they give you so much space in your house, but you can only place stuff in these very small designated spots. Oh sure, the final house upgrade gives you an entire room to decorate, but literally, all I want is to be able to place a chest in my house, but for some reason, I can't do that. Like, the decorating aspect in the old world is actually really good. I'd actually consider making my farm look good if it didn't already look hideous from the makers. But for some reason, in my house, they just don't give me the option. Speaking of the overworld, I personally found that there isn't a lot to explore. Like, the only areas there are, excluding the secret areas, is your farmland, which consists of only 3 areas, and the town. Don't get me wrong, you have enough room to plant crops, decorate, and forage, but the whole world just seems a little bit shallow, if that makes any sense. Like, there's more areas due to the secret areas you access via the sprites, but they feel so disconnected from the rest of the game, I kinda don't count them. And I think that's lazy game design, because instead of having these areas be organically integrated into the world, they're accessed through an immersion-breaking menu. Wouldn't it be more rewarding and immersive to have these secret areas be a section of the map that's blocked off and only unlocks when you hit it when your skill is high enough? These secret areas are meant to be a reward for doing something like leveling a skill to a certain level. But as the player, I'm never actively searching this area out, and it doesn't feel like a reward for something I'm actively putting effort in accomplishing. It's just given to me out of nowhere because I was hitting too many trees. And if there's another aspect of the game that rewards you for simply existing, it's the story progression, which I admit, the premise works really well. You're taking over your grandpa's farm, and the mirror needs your help to make town improvements to bring in the tourists. Main problem is, the items that were requested by the mayor are so laughably easy, and the improvements made to the town are so unimpressive, and the rewards you get are equally as unimportant, it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything meaningful.
Howdy neighbor, do you happen to have any cloth on you?
I mean, I guess I have some lying around that I'm not using.
Congratulations player character. Thanks to your contributions we were able to open up this entire clothing store. We all are so forever in your debt.
Wow, I feel such gratification for completing this monumental challenge. The whole town improvement system just feels really lazily merged in with the normal daily request system. It was probably to save time, but in retrospect, it just shatters the whole premise of the game because of how easy and unrewarding it is. In stark comparison, Stardew just does it better. The community bundles offer a great challenge, meaningful rewards, and offer players a greater sense of agency due to the various ways they're able to tackle these challenges, all while making sense in the confines of its world building. In Pioneers of Alltown, it's lacking in all of these departments, which I find to be ridiculous considering how easy it'd be to come up with something better. Maybe the town could have been in a bigger disarray, functioning but not prospering, and maybe you get more meaningful perks each time you complete a town upgrade. No marvelous, changing my clothing does not count as a perk. Like, what if upgrading the street lamps required a certain amount of metal and glass, and it caused shops to stay open later? Or what if you invested resources into cleaning the ocean, making the quality of the fish go up or something? Or what if you spent rocks paving a hiking trail which unlocks a new area and a shortcut to the mine? And suddenly, player agency goes up. The player feels like their actions have an impact on the world around them. The player has choices now. They made the decision to go after whatever objective felt suited them the best, and saw the results of their labor. Like, I don't care about the NPCs enough to do it solely for their affection. Let me elaborate real quick, because I'm pretty sure there's someone in the comment section writing a long-winded rant about how the characters are good and I know nothing because I'm a sweaty doo-doo fanboy. I mean, they're right, but like, the characters are definitely well written and designed, but the game is just actively working against them. The game just doesn't do them justice. Like, look at this! What am I even looking at here? I can't even see their face. And even when I do, they lack any meaningful facial expressions. Remember when character portraits were a thing? Because all we had was this to try and discern human emotions from? Can we go back? I mean, the overworld models would have been fine if they just put more effort into making them more expressive, but if there wasn't enough time or budget, why not just go for a solution like character portraits? You know, like their other games. It just seems like a huge step backwards for the series considering the huge leap in graphics. Oh, and don't get me started on the numerous amounts of reused animations. Like, did they really decide to pour all this money into making the overworld and character models look great, but making it redundant by skimping out on the animations? I mean, this cutscene in particular looks great. But would it be as noteworthy if they didn't have Lars rev an imaginary motorcycle? That was a loaded question. Honestly, I just wish that there was more animation to bring life to the characters, but there isn't. Also a detriment to the characters is their limited amounts of dialogue, which is pretty inexcusable for a company whose flagship title has this as a key gameplay element. One minute you're going through a well-written cutscene, the next you're stuck with the same 3 to 4 lines of dialogue for the rest of the game. The contrast is so jarring. Like, the amount of dialogue isn't even mediocre, it's actually bad. Like, I can go up to one of the marriage candidates and propose to her, go through a cutscene where she's all like,
大好きじゃ。愛しておるぞ。
and 2 seconds later she just goes,
Hello.
It's so bad, even after getting married to her, her line still doesn't change in any meaningful way. Like, dude, what are you even doing? How much are they paying to do nothing? We don't even kiss at the wedding, what kind of bullshit? Although, if we're talking about small grievances I have with the game, the shoddy hit detection is one of the worst. Like, I know they have a tile highlighted for you, but look at this. I'm literally in front of what I'm trying to hit, and attempting to make micro adjustments to adjust myself just exacerbates the issue. Come on, why? You think I'm exaggerating? Sometimes the highlighted tile just misses entirely, like what am I supposed to do? I mean, while we're at it, I could be mentioning other small stuff like not being able to sort the crafting menu, cooking a single dish taking 30 minutes, the artifact bags taking up an entire inventory slot. But all of that pales in comparison to the load times and FPS issues. There are numerous FPS drops in the game, most notable when you progress further into the game, mainly due to all the crops and makers you'll probably have. Oh, and when it rains, you will always get a noticeable drop in FPS, if not complete random stutters while you move. And the load times, while they aren't an extremely bad wait, I'm still waiting like 7 or 8 seconds each time I want to enter the town, which in comparison to other farming sim games would be almost instant. It breaks up the pace of the game and disincentivizes me from even entering the town in the first place, and when I go, I feel like I have to min-max the trip there, which is pretty stupid because it's not the walk there that's annoying, it's the 7 seconds I have to wait staring at someone else's feet pics. And this next part might be encouraging or absolutely demoralizing. Because, at the time of recording game footage, Marvelous actually released a few patches addressing these issues. The loading screen to the town used to take about 20 seconds on average, and it got reduced down to 7 seconds after the patch. So, does this mean the optimization has plateaued and we are forever stuck with a 7-second loading screen? Potentially. But the good news is at least that Marvelous is actively patching their game and fixing it through the criticisms of the player base. Marvelous is actually planning to fix even more problems in the next update regarding the makers and the limited amounts of character dialogue. They've acknowledged the criticisms, apologized that the game didn't meet our standards, and are offering a fix. And I think that's pretty commendable. On the flip side, they also have a decent amount of DLC lined up, adding outfits, events, characters from older games, new areas, and normally it wouldn't have been a problem, but the base game feels so bare it feels bad for them to add DLC. I honestly think that this game is barely worth the $60 for the base game alone, and I think that's pretty evident because Marvelous didn't put enough care into the base game, letting it have a rocky and buggy Japanese release. All while putting more priority into making these DLC add-ons instead of delaying the game entirely. And that kind of puts me in a hard spot, because as the person making the review, do I take into account the fact that Marvelous plans to fix a lot of the core issues I have with the game? I mean, once they add all the DLC and fix all the issues I have, it's pretty much a completely different game. But for now, all I can say about Story Seasons Pioneers of Olive Town is that it currently makes for a really good bare-bones farming sim entry. It's pleasant, I enjoyed playing it, but I found it overall lacking and too basic. In a world where Stardew exists, the bar has been set, and sadly, Marvelous this time has not reached this bar. Not by a long shot. That's not to say that Stardew is objectively better. There exist people out there who find Stardew a bit too overwhelming, in which case this game would be perfect for them. But there's no denying that there could be massive improvements than what we currently have. I'm not disappointed because I didn't have a good time with the game, but because I know it could be so much better, and I hope Marvelous realizes that too. Maybe in the future I'll do a follow-up video once all the DLCs and patches get released to really highlight the full potential this game has. I have come several months from the future to bring news of the 1.0.5 update. Wait, several months? I thought this video was supposed to be out in April. Well, it didn't. And let's just keep this brief, alright? If this scene takes any longer to draw, another one of me will appear. The 1.0.5 update is the first update to offer substantial changes to gameplay rather than performance improvements and bug fixes, of which includes numerous criticisms covered in this video. For example, there's now new character dialogue added and adjustments to current ones to make them slightly more immersive. You also no longer have to press A to enter and exit a certain location, which also adds to the immersion. Furthermore, when eating out, there's new animations and models for the food you eat, which also adds to the immersion. I thought you said that there were substantial gameplay changes. And I thought you said farming sim games thrived on immersion, which this game lacked. There are gameplay changes though. You can now sidestep and lock your movement in a certain direction, making it easier to aim. And they finally changed how the makers worked by letting you add 10 times the amount you could before, drastically changing up the cycle and pressure of having to constantly refill them. Wait, doesn't that kinda make this video irrelevant? Not necessarily. While they did fix major complaints such as the makers, there's still plenty of merit to the video. Some of the critiques still hold, and the video acts as a footnote of how badly Marvelous launched this game. Yeah, that's right. The majority of these changes should have been made before the game was even released. I mean, just briefly looking over the patch notes would make me assume I'm looking at a game during its beta stages, let alone a game months past its launch date. Don't get me wrong, the changes to bugs and gameplay definitely make the gameplay less infuriating, but how much does that improve the game as a whole? Honestly, the weakest part of Pioneers of Alltown as of right now is the amount of content. I mean, sure, there's DLC that adds new areas, but those areas mainly acted as housing for the returning characters, rather than something that impacts the game as a whole. It still has that disconnected feeling you were talking about, so much so you could probably skip the DLC and not miss out on anything unless you have the hots for one of the returning characters. And if that's all we're getting out of the biggest DLC update, then there's just no hope for new meaningful content. There is only so much you can polish something before you start seeing diminishing returns, and I think Marvelous is reaching the apex of how good Pioneers of Alltown could be, which is still pretty mediocre in terms of other farming sim games currently being produced. And that's all I got. It's about time I go anyways. I gotta get back to work on that Rune Factory 5 video. I'll see you then.
Hey, when's the Rune Factory 5 video coming out?